I want to give a special shout out to my patrons, to my Bibliosprand, Bibliosworn, and Bibliomancers. Thank you so much for supporting my hobby and passion even more. It means a lot to me. Hi everyone, Petrik here. Today's video will be about overrated fantasy series, but I want to make it clear that by saying overrated, this doesn't mean that this series is objectively overrated. Let's just say that it is more precise to be calling these fantasy series I'm going to mention highly praised fantasy series that didn't click with me. I think it is more appropriate to call them that. But Salty Petrik might be unleashed or not as I read through the comments again. First, I'm going to mention 5 highly praised fantasy series from the top of my head that didn't click with me despite how well loved they are. And I'm going to mention briefly why they didn't click with me. And then after that, I'm going to mention 5 fantasy series most often mentioned as the most overrated by, well, all of you in the community tab. But I'm just going to highlight one comment from my community tab because if I highlight more than one, I think this video will be super long because I didn't expect that I would get more than 100 comments. And apparently I got almost 200 comments on overrated fantasy series. So the first series from the top of my head is The Broken Empire by Mark Lawrence. I know that this will piss a lot of people, especially those who love grimdark fantasy, but personally speaking, I think there were a lot of things that I didn't like in the Broken Empire trilogy. And it's not about Jork, the main character. Usually when people say they dislike the Broken Empire trilogy, they always mention it's because of the main character. That is not the case for me, because I personally think that Jork is one of the most interesting main characters to ever exist in fantasy, even though well, he's super unlikable, understandably, but you know, that's intentional. Back when I was going to start reading the Broken Empire trilogy, I knew that I won't be reading a good character. This will be an anti-hero, or to be more precise, this is a villain, and I got what I expected. But my issue with the Broken Empire overall is because a lot of the plotline are resolved through Deus Ex Machina, and sometimes it felt just unbelievable to me that the conflicts could be resolved that easily. The writing is good, I never fault Mark Lawrence's prose. The main character is intriguing and is also fitting for grimdark fantasy. But again, my issue with the Broken Empire trilogy is that I think a lot of the conflicts are resolved way too easily, and also I don't like the world building in the Broken Empire trilogy. I don't know if this can be considered as spoiler or not, but the Broken Empire trilogy and also Red Queen's War trilogy takes place on Earth, and sometimes it just doesn't feel like high fantasy to me, because the main definition of high fantasy is usually a fantasy series that takes place on a different world than ours. And it's harder for me to suspend my disbelief sometimes when I'm reading through the Broken Empire and also Red Queen's War trilogy. But for those of you who don't know, Book of the Ancestor trilogy is one of my favorite trilogies of all time. Then the second series I want to mention, well, this is not a series, but let's just say that almost every book by Gavriel K that I've read, all of them I consider to be overrated because, well, none of them click with me except Tigana. I've read Under Heaven, well, I've tried Under Heaven, I've read Sailing to Sarantium, I have DNF, Alliance of Arasan. All of them just didn't click with me. I have so many issues with them. I think, I know that Gavriel K is highly praised, but you know what? I just think that he's great with his prose, but that's it. His characters, everything else just didn't click with me. And this is why when people ask me where they should start when it comes to reading Gavriel K's books, because he has released a lot of books, I always recommend Tigana, because Tigana is great. It is one of the best standalone that I've read. Then the next well-loved series that I consider to be, well, overrated, it is The Chronicles of the Black Company by Glen Cook. I know that, well, this is considered to be one of the most influential grimdark fantasy series. And I've read 5 books out of the available 9 books, I think, in the Chronicles of the Black Company. And I will say this, I enjoyed the second book. And overall, I like the first and third book enough. But the main reason why I read The Black Company in the first place is because Steven Erikson mentioned Chronicles of the Black Company as the series that is influential to his writing for Malazan Book of the Fallen, one of my favorite series of all time. But I think I made a mistake of reading Chronicles of the Black Company after I finished reading Malazan Book of the Fallen, because in my opinion, Malazan Book of the Fallen is by far better than Chronicles of the Black Company, even though, again, Erikson mentioned that Black Company is influential in his writing for Malazan Book of the Fallen. My main issue with Chronicles of the Black Company is pretty simple. I don't like reading Glen Cook's prose. I think Glen Cook's prose is very terse, and generally I need more words in a sentence for me to care about the characters and the plotline, and that often doesn't happen in Chronicles of the Black Company. I really struggled with reading the 4th and 5th book, and after that, knowing that there is still 4 books left in the series, I just decided to just drop it for now. Well, I don't know whether I will continue with this series or not, but let's just say that it won't happen anytime soon. So yeah, despite Black Company being mentioned as one of the most influential grimdark fantasy series, you know what? It's not mandatory to read this series. I think there are a lot of other better grimdark fantasy series. Then the 4th series I want to mention here is The Shade of Magic trilogy by V.E. Schwab. I mean, if you know my reviewing career on Goodreads, you know that I dislike this trilogy completely. Yeah, I absolutely loathe this trilogy. I have so many issues with it, and it's quite surprising because I actually like reading Vicious by V.E. Schwab. And thinking about it, the first book, The Darker Shade of Magic, I still liked it enough, but after reading the second book, A Gathering of Shadows, I was massively disappointed. And then the third book, A Conjuring of Light, is also, well, disappointing, although not as worse as A Gathering of Shadows. The Shade of Magic trilogy is actually super popular because it has 269,000 ratings on Goodreads right now, and it has more than 34,000 reviews. And you know, this series is actually super popular in the YA community. Although I have mentioned at the beginning of this video that I'm going to mention only 5 series that's most often to be considered the most overrated according to you, but actually The Darker Shade of Magic is in the 6th place. Yeah. And I'm going to highlight one of the comments here. 100% A Darker Shade of Magic. Genuinely one of the worst trilogies I've ever read. There was nothing I like about it, and I'm still shocked to this day because I should have liked it based on the description. I hated the characters, they were so bland, the world building sucked, the pacing was really bad, the writing was so dry. I've had more fun reading history books. Overall great concept, but absolute terrible execution. I couldn't disagree with a lot of this because I agree with a lot of them. The main reason why I wanted to read Shade of Magic trilogy is because, again, I love Vicious, and then I thought the premise of this trilogy just sounded so awesome, but the actual experience, well, it doesn't live up to my expectation. It is really unfortunate, and because of reading this trilogy, I have stopped reading V.E. Schwab's books for years. And recently I just got one of her newest book, Glen, and this one kind of sounds interesting, so maybe I will give this a try someday. And well, this one is only standalone, and considering that Vicious was at first a one-off standalone, maybe I will have better luck with Glen than the Shade of Magic trilogy. I mean, it couldn't be worse than this. So I still have one more series that I consider to be overrated as of now, but this will have to wait until the end of this video. Why? Because in my community tab, this is the fantasy series that's most often mentioned as the most overrated by, well, a lot of readers. Actually, it's not just on my community tab, it is in many forums, and surprisingly, it is also one of the most influential epic fantasy series. And I think if you're watching this right now, I think you will know what I'm talking about. So yeah, before I move on to the discussion why many series are often mentioned as overrated or not, I'm going to be talking about 5 series that's considered to be the most overrated according to you, the most frequently. And at the number 5 spot, it is the Lightbringer series by Brent Weeks. The Lightbringer series currently has 4.22 average rating out of 111,000 ratings and 5,600 reviews on Goodreads. That is a lot. And I have read this series to its completion. One of the comments I received on my community tab said this: "For me, I would have to say the Lightbringer series. It started off pretty good and there were moments of epicness, but in general, it just stayed at average for me. The books were an absolute slog to get through and put me in a reading slump each time I finished one, and the ending was a bit ridiculous. Felt like I wasted so much time on a series that is pretty well liked and had impressive review scores for each book on Goodreads. Disappointed." And I can't really fault the comment here because I personally really loved the first 3 books in the Lightbringer series. They have their flaws, but The Blinding Knife was so good, especially The Blinding Knife and The Broken Eye. Both of them were incredible in my opinion. But starting from the 4th book, The Blood Mirror, things just started to go downhill, and well, let's just say that I'm not happy with how Brent Weeks conclude this series in The Burning White. It's not even the ending itself, and I didn't felt bored with reading The Burning White. But to put it simply, there were so many Deus Ex Machina involved, and a lot of things that happened in The Burning White kinda betray what's so good about the series in the first place, especially in the first 3 books. So yeah, I can certainly understand this comment. And at the number 4 spot, and this one hurts me because this is Mistborn trilogy by Brandon Sanderson. The first book in Mistborn currently has a 4.46 average rating out of 502,000 ratings and also 36,000 reviews. That is a lot. Seriously, that is a lot of numbers. And you know how I feel about Mistborn trilogy. It is the series that sparked my love for reading fantasy, and I just finished my reread of the first Mistborn again, and I still love it as much as the first time I read through it. And you know what? As I said constantly, I am biased about this trilogy. So one of the comments said this: every YouTuber hyped Mistborn up to be the best fantasy of our generation, and I honestly found it to be extremely average. The magic system was unlike anything I've ever read, but the plot, characters, and prose were all a little underwhelming. A complex magic system does not a good story make. And that's just your opinion, okay? But no, seriously, I completely understand if a book or a series doesn't work with you, but personally, I think I have to disagree with a lot of the things that this comment mentioned. I obviously agree that the magic system was definitely unlike anything that I've ever read as well. Personally, I think reading Mistborn trilogy for the first time feels like playing video games because the magic system are so fitting to role-playing video games. As for the plot, characters, and prose, none of them actually felt underwhelming to me, but Brandon Sanderson is often criticized for his prose, and I can certainly understand why his prose doesn't click with a lot of readers. The number 3 series most often mentioned as overrated is the Kingkiller Chronicle by Petrik Rothfuss. The Name of the Wind is one of my favorite books of all time. I think it is the best fantasy debut of all time, and it currently has a 4.52 average rating out of 825,000 ratings and also 47,000 reviews on Goodreads. This is currently one of the most popular and highly praised fantasy book out there. And one of the comments said this: the Kingkiller Chronicle is all pretty writing, no foundation of story. The romance with Dana made my skin get up and crawl away from my body as I read it. The feral, horny teenager wish fulfillment was bad when it came out and has aged like a fine milk. Kvothe is highly unlikable, just a poetry book masquerading as a fantasy series. Still wanna know what's behind the door in the library though. Shout out to Bass as well. So this one is kinda odd because I can certainly understand why the things that mentioned here doesn't click with this particular commenter and a lot of readers of the Kingkiller Chronicle, especially the stuff with the Felurian, because that one also just, well, they just went on for too long in my opinion. But I completely disagree that there is no foundation or there is no story, because I think there is a lot. There is a lot of story, foundation, and secrets in the Kingkiller Chronicle trilogy, and it is one of the reasons why this series is still praised as one of the most, well, highly praised fantasy series of all time. At least we can agree that Rothfuss' prose is beautiful, and yeah, I'm also not a fan of Kvothe and Dana's romance. Well, I was okay with them in The Name of the Wind, but it was a bit too much in the Wise Man's Fear. I haven't reread the Wise Man's Fear yet, so that might change someday, but we'll see. And next, at the number 2 spot, according to you, this is one of the most overrated fantasy series out there. I am actually quite surprised about this, and it is the Poppy War trilogy by R.F. Kuang. The first book, The Poppy War, currently has a 4.11 average rating out of 110,000 ratings and also 19,000 reviews. I actually didn't know just how popular the Poppy War right now until I read through the comments I received on my community tab. So many people mention the Poppy War trilogy, and usually a series can reach its overrated status only after it gets so popular. And you know what? I think the Poppy War trilogy can be considered as popular now, and that is quite a surprise to me because I love this trilogy. It is one of my favorite trilogies, and I read through the Poppy War back when no one was reading it. Only a few people have read the Poppy War back when I first read the Poppy War. So I am genuinely happy that R.F. Kuang keeps on gaining success. So one of the comments said this: the Poppy War series. The first half of the first book was fascinating, but from the second half, the magic system just feels completely undefined and solely to provide plot armor. I feel like the main characters also don't make choices that follow their characterizations in the book. They make bad choices, but it's not just that, it's that those bad choices don't really fit the characters. Also found it incredibly boring and painful to get through because it's hard to follow and all over the place. Things are happening and there's no sort of direction or even clever misdirection. Oh no, this is clever misdirection. Just my opinion, sorry. This had made me so nervous to read the Greenbone saga since it was a similarly marketed Asian-inspired fantasy, but I love this series and it's one of my all-time favorites now. So I love the Poppy War trilogy and I consider the Greenbone saga as the best completed fantasy trilogy of all time. So, you know what? You are completely forgiven. But seriously speaking, you don't have to say sorry for disliking the Poppy War trilogy or any series to me. You don't have to say sorry for that because reading is subjective. I will talk about this more soon. And for the past 4 years, I have actually heard plenty of criticisms regarding the first half and the second half of the Poppy War. Sometimes people love the first half of the Poppy War and they consider the second half to be completely, well, too different from the first half of the Poppy War, and I think they felt that it's awkward and it doesn't fit the narrative setup in the first place. And I can understand that. I can definitely understand that. From my assessment and from my experience, I think R.F. Kuang was trying to show its readers, whether it clicked or not, she was trying to show its readers that war can visit you anytime, so it can happen suddenly and it can be super deadly. And I will have to admit that one of the reasons why the Poppy War trilogy clicked with me so much is because I am an Asian reader. And the Second Sino-Japanese War, I have never seen it implemented into an epic fantasy novel. Even to this day, 4 years after I read the Poppy War for the first time, I still haven't read anything, maybe except by Ken Liu, I still haven't read anything that involved the Second Sino-Japanese War in epic fantasy series. It is quite surprising to me that the Poppy War is in the second place, but you know what? It is what it is. And the number one place, I don't know if you know this by now, but it is The Wheel of Time by Robert Jordan. Yeah, it is by far the series that's most often mentioned as the most overrated. And as I said, this is one of the most influential epic fantasy series of all time. The first book, Eye of the World, currently has a 4.18 ratings out of 464,000 ratings and also 18,500 reviews on Goodreads. For me personally, I've read only 5 books in the series so far. And if I were to judge this based on the first 4 books that I've read, I like the first book, The Eye of the World. I love The Great Hunt. I also like The Dragon Reborn. I was absolutely disappointed with The Shadow Rising. So if I were to judge my ratings or my assessment only based on those 4 books, I will say that The Wheel of Time is completely overrated. But lately, because I've just read and loved The Fires of Heaven, I think The Fires of Heaven is up there with The Great Hunt as the best of the series so far. I don't know whether that's an unpopular opinion or not, but well, that's my opinion. Overall, for now, I will have to say that The Wheel of Time is still overrated, but not that much. For now, I still don't know because I will read The Lord of Chaos in June. One of the comments said this, and I'm going to mention the reply as well because this pretty much sums up all discussion about why The Wheel of Time is considered to be overrated. So, The Wheel of Time is incredibly overrated. The plot meanders or grinds to a halt at times. Many of the characters are annoying and likable. A lot of interpersonal drama is made just by simple miscommunications that could easily be avoided or characters being unrealistically stubborn and stupid. And one of the replies said this, I'm 11 books in and this series is simultaneously one of the best and one of the worst fantasy series ever. A lot of it is genius, but my god, it gets slow and that damn wandering circus. I've read The Fires of Heaven and I fully agree with that damn wandering circus. I mean, what was that? What was that? And I don't think I need to discuss these points in details because, you know, I agree with them. And a lot of people who love this series actually kinda agree with some of these points, especially regarding characters being stupid and also miscommunication being used as one of the main plot device of the series because, well, that is kinda true. And if you have watched my least favorite tropes video, then you will know that miscommunication being used as a plot device is one of my least favorite things, and well, this is unfortunately one of the things used most frequently in The Wheel of Time. But then again, after reading The Fires of Heaven, I'm still hopeful about finishing this series. Slowly but sure, I will not rush through it. As a content creator, reviewer, and also observer receiving these comments, it is insanely amazing and also confusing to see how different people's opinion on a single series. Have you noticed that every time this topic pops up, it's always the same series being mentioned as overrated? And also, if you ask what's your favorite series of all times, well, the majority of the times, these are the series that's also mentioned as the best series of all time. This is why I always say reading is subjective. I have reviewed more or less 600 fantasy books now, and I will say this. From my experience, almost none of our reviews, whether it's regarding the prose, the characters, the world building, our thoughts on them, on the plot line, all of them are opinion, not facts. They are subjective, not facts. None of them can be called as factual. Some of you will disagree with me, some of you will agree with me. I am truly happy that some readers, or you, have the same reading taste as me, but it is completely okay to disagree with me. Please remember that all reviews are opinions, they are not facts. The only thing that can be called facts are the number of pages, the release date, the name of the author, and the name of the series. They are facts. You cannot call The Wheel of Time the Show of Time. You cannot call it that. It is The Wheel of Time by Robert Jordan, not by George R. R. Martin. For example, I have seen this comment quite often. Someone said that Malazan Book of the Fallen is in fact a mess. No, it is not. It is not true. That is not a fact. That is your opinion. Yeah, Malazan Book of the Fallen is not in fact a mess. It is, in your opinion, a mess. I personally don't think it is a mess. There were some books in the series, like Dust of Dreams, that just didn't click with me. But I still won't call it a mess. I think doing this video has made me realize even further why author must not check reviews, because well, you will get opinions on every single thing in a positive and negative way. Some people will agree that the characters are good, but what is good? What is great? Are they well written, or are they fitting to your expectations? But there are so many criteria for characters or characterizations to be considered as good or great. And the same goes for plotting, prose, world building, and so many things. And I must say, I am actually quite surprised that nobody actually mentioned The Lord of the Rings by Tolkien in the community tab. That is super surprising to me, because The Lord of the Rings and also A Song of Ice and Fire by George R. R. Martin, only mentioned twice in my community tab, are often mentioned as some of the most overrated fantasy series of all time. But yeah, none of the comments appeared, and I'm quite surprised. In conclusion, I will just say this: when a series is considered as overrated, usually the series has reached a very popular status, or if not, it's been extremely well loved by many reviewers. For instance, a lot of reviewers called the Greenbone Saga one of their favorite series of all time, myself included. And the same goes for The Faithful and the Fallen by John Gwynne. But in the wider market, these two series can still be considered as underhyped. From my perspective, when a series is being called as overrated, I will, well, take a look. I will take a look and read the sample and find out for myself whether the prose will click with me or not. And if yes, and if the cover art interests me, yes, it matters, okay? Cover art matters. Then I will just read and find out for myself whether the book will click with me or not. I should also note that there is a conundrum when it comes to overhype and underhype, because, well, hype leads you to try reading a book or a series that you didn't know about. But at the same time, I think a lot of hype could actually ruin or make you more critical of a book or a series. So yeah, it is a conundrum, and I don't think there is anything that can be solved about this. Before I conclude this video, I want to highlight one of the comments mentioned in my community tab, and it is this: I haven't read enough adult fantasy to weigh in on this, but I think the comments are telling. Pretty much any book or series can be considered overrated, since reading is such a personal and subjective thing. It all depends on the person and also what is going on in their life when they read the book. I know for me, some books resonate so much better at different points in my life because of the circumstances that surrounds my reading it. And I completely agree with this comment. Completely. I've read plenty of books that, well, just didn't work for me the first time I read through them. But now that I've been reading for, well, plenty of years, I think it's getting easier for me to acknowledge that I was just in a wrong reading mood for a particular book or particular series. For example, The Crimson Queen by Alec Hudson. When I first read through The Crimson Queen, it just didn't click with me. I actually DNF'd the book at, I think, about 25% or 30%. But I also realized that this is probably because I was in the wrong mood for this. And a few months later, I gave it a try again, and The Crimson Queen became one of my favorite books. So yeah, I think timing matters, reading mood definitely matters, and expectation also matters. And I think the term overrated, or as I said, a popular fantasy series or well-loved fantasy series that didn't click with us, is influenced by so many things and can be caused simply by overhype or reading them at a wrong mood. It's just a matter of timing. So yeah, that's it for today's video. Let me know what your thoughts about this video and also the series I just mentioned, and well, the series that you have mentioned in the community tab. To cure the salt in this video, well, let me know which series on this video that I just mentioned that you love, and please tell me why. Next month, I will do an underrated fantasy series video to counter this video. As always, thank you so much for watching and thank you for your support. Bye bye.